Hey guys, yes, we had a glow up. I'm no longer racist and fat man. Well, I'm no longer a fat man. I went to the barber and I said, take a little off of the sides, aka the love handles. The barber says, good one, use it in your act. So I did. And now I'm basing Chad. Look at this. Look at this. For one day, I was possessed by a Viking. That was yesterday. In that one day of being possessed by a Viking spirit that I channeled, clip this and expose me. Ragnarok made me cut the size. I had an experience of what it was like to be a Viking. Just in terms of aesthetics for one day. And then I went to the haircut woman today, aka Great Clips, aka the new Fantastic Sam's. And I said, dear haircut woman, I would like a 90s haircut. And she said, what would you like? She said, would you like frosted tips, Justin Timberlake? I said, no. She said, would you like a flat top? I said, hell no. Sister, please, what you talking about? She said, what haircut would you like? I said, ever heard of Rob Thomas or George McClooney? I said, I want the Caesar cut. And she said, boy, you done Ragnarok the sides of your head. You can't get a Caesar cut with Viking cuts on the side. I said, damn. That's a good point, haircut girl. So I said, what can we do? She says, I can give you a high top fade, even it out. Kid and play before a white boy. I said, yes. So somebody said, your haircut looks like tiny mustache. Hell no. Hell no. This haircut is straight up fly, boy. This haircut is a straight up kid and play cut for a white boy. So we did a whole glow up. I said, you know what? It's time to step away from Fabio. I'm stepping back to the classic Jay's Analysis 007 theme. Where you see me looking all svelte with my AOC model Movado watch. How dare that Congo Aquinas man call me fat? I said, I will show him. Within one day I will be a Viking. In 2 days I will be like Kid and Play. Thus proving I'm not a racist. Because I got a Kid and Play haircut. And look how svelte I am. Welcome everybody. It's another classic installment of Classic Jay's Analysis. The only thing that remains is these stupid reading glasses. Maybe I'll have to get some high-tech what do you call them, tiny glasses that stick on your eyes, them little plastic glasses, contact lenses. High-tech contact lenses for a high top fade. Anyway, so the barber woman, she says, you're gonna have to wait and let these sides grow out a little bit before you get the Rob Thomas or the George Clooney or the Antonio Banderas from 1996. And I said, okay. I said, okay. Y'all know what I'm talking about, right? I'm gonna do it too. Because I'm trying to think about what's the only haircut nobody else is doing. Because I don't like anybody else's haircuts. Can you epistemically justify Skibbity Toilet? Exactly what I asked Matthew McConaughey. And what happened? He was silenced. We all know what happened in the Matthew McConaughey debate. We all saw it. It went down. Now, I do not want this stupid ass bowl cut version of the Caesar cut. That looks ridiculous. Zoomers is out here getting like the stupidest version of every haircut, right? Like this dude over here. Like the dude with the glasses with the Joey what's his face. I don't want that Caesar cut. I'm talking about give me a damn classic, you know, I'm not a huge George Clooney fan, but give me the McClooney or give me the where's the Antonio Banderas? He had a pretty good Caesar cut back in the day. Not that one. It's a different picture. I'm gonna do it too. People didn't think I was gonna do it. I'm gonna do a Caesar cut. Watch. Just watch. Here we go. Here we go. This one's, see, that's what I'm talking about. Get this one right here. That's not bad. Get that 90s Antonio Banderas Caesar cut. I can pull that off. But we gotta let the Ragnarok grow back out on the sides. I Ragnaroked it for one day. Anyway, we're not here to talk about stupid ass hairstyles. We are heteromosexual today. Heteromosexual. Heterometrosexual. Totally. But y'all, everybody's mind is blowed right now. They're like, wow, it's Caesar cut. Ain't nobody got a Caesar cut right now. You want to know what? You want to hear a funny story about the 90s? I kid you not. It might seem a little bit weird now, but I'm not kidding. I would be mistaken in the 90s at times for Rob Thomas. I'm not joking. I had multiple times where people would walk up to me. They thought in the 90s that I was Rob Thomas because I did look a lot like Rob Thomas right there in the 1990s. And I'm not kidding. People are like, is that Rob Thomas? I had a girl walk up to me. She goes, are you Rob Thomas? I was like, no. So, if you're gone, baby, you need to come home. This life ain't worth. Anyway. But yeah, see, Rob Thomas had that Caesar cut too for a little while in the 1990s. That's the only haircut that nobody has right now. That it's time to bring it back. And plus, I'd rather go back to why not? We should go back to the 90s anyway. Some dude said I've been rocking the. Okay, so now that I'm gonna take credit for the resurgence of the Caesar cut, we already got people cutting me off at the pass. I already had the Caesar cut since the 1990s. All right, well, you know what? I'm gonna make it popular. How's that? Anyway, enough of that nonsense. That's enough of that nonsense. Hey, dude, that's enough of that nonsense. Today we're going to be talking about some crazy stuff. Crazy stuff. And before we get into the book, today's book we're going to be analyzing, as we classically have done for so many years, book analyses, breakdown, commentary. We will be analyzing the Cambridge Companion to Western Mysticism and Esotericism, the book that you've heard me mention on the last couple fourth hours of Lord Voldemort. And there's some amazing chapters in this that connect a lot of things that we've suspected would be connected for many years. We won't be covering every chapter because it's a pretty hefty book. I've read most of it. Now it's almost 500 pages, or excuse me, 450-ish pages almost. Yeah. I read a lot of it on the road trip to Vegas for our live event that we had, which was a lot of fun. Shout out to everybody that was at the live event. Appreciate all you guys. The topics are the ancient mysteries, Pythagoreanism, Parmenides, Plotinus, Hermeticism, Jewish mysticism, Christian mysticism, Sufism, Kabbalah, medieval mysticism, Hildegard and women's mysticism, Renaissance Hermeticism, Christian Kabbalah, Paracelsus, Rosicrucianism, Jacob Boehme. I'm a big fan of Jacob Boehme and his mysticism. That's actually true. Nicolas Cage is a big Jacob Boehme fan. Freemasonry, Swedenborg, Mesmer, Spiritualism, Blavatsky and Theosophy, Rudolf Steiner, Golden Dawn and OTO, Gurdjieff, Carl Jung, Rene Guénon, Via Negativa, Paganism, New Age, and then there's a series of chapters at the end which are about specific currents or threads: alchemy, astrology, gnosis, magic, math mysticism, panpsychism, and sex magic. So, we're going to kick it off by getting into the early. It kind of moves chronologically. This book, every chapter is written by a different scholar, so it's not just one guy. Usually, Cambridge companions are pretty good. Sometimes people criticize the kind of limited views that are presented. For example, I've read many of the Cambridge companions. I read the Plato Cambridge companion. I read a lot of the Aristotle companion. I've got some other Cambridge companions to other stuff too, and usually they're pretty good. But somebody might take issue with the fact that they chose one scholar to present the Plato's doctrine of logos or something like that, and then people criticize it by saying, well, this is actually a pretty controversial view, and there's more views than this. So anyway, if you guys would hit like and share, welcome everybody. We're going to dive into the text. And I think you're going to notice a lot of common threads, a lot of common themes and patterns that we've seen in a lot of the talks that we've done, both theologically, historically, and even geopolitically. Because as you can imagine, several of the people that we thought might be spies are now in these independent corroborating sources admitted to likely be spies. So this was, again, a contentious sort of theory that we've seen in people like Dr. Richard Spence, whom I've interviewed and recommended his books for many years. We've seen other scholars and people opine that people like Blavatsky might have been spies. And I was surprised, actually, to see the Cambridge Companion admit this in many places as well. Not just for Blavatsky, but actually for a couple other of the oddball characters and figures behind Western mysticism and esotericism over the centuries. Now, last note before we get started is that I kind of went hog wild with debates the last week. Once I got back from the road trip, I was eager to debate again. And I did I don't know how many hours almost every day for a week debating. So I'm kind of really bored of debating now. And everyone knows these are the cycles that I go in. The other thing that's happening is that I have over 200 pages written of Esoteric Hollywood 3, baby. So here's the notes for Esoteric Hollywood 3. All of the notes that we take on the movies, as well as scholarly academic essays on the movies. So I'm going to have to focus on getting Esoteric Hollywood 3 done. The publisher said, hey, we want 3. You need to buckle down and do it. So I said, you know what? You're right. I'm glad you have kind of given me a sort of publishing-ish date. So I want to really buckle down. I want to finish Esoteric Hollywood 3. If I don't put a lot of time and effort into it, I won't be able to finish it. So we're never doing debates again, but I'm kind of now tired of doing the debates. I've been tired of doing debates, even though I keep doing them. So as you guys know, I like to cycle through different things. So we're going to be moving out of a constantly debating the same old subjects. And I also feel like a lot of these subjects, I don't know what else there is to say, right? I'm really tired of debating Thomism and Catholicism. I'm really tired of debating Islam, because those have been the two main probably topics for the last couple years or 3 years. There was a lot of focus on Protestant stuff a while back, and Protestant stuff comes up a lot. But I'm just kind of tired of that debate. I mean, how many times does it have to happen? And debate, almost 99% of the time, it ends up being the same. And then when we open it up for people to call in, almost no one has any skills or training in actually debating. So it just ends up being, I feel like I'm humiliating people, and I start to feel bad for them. You know what I mean? So, it's not that that's necessarily wrong, because people that have ridiculous views, there's a place to do that. But I don't want this is not going to just be a humiliating debate channel. It's never really been that. So I don't want it to turn into that. So I want to get back to the structure of actually going through real texts, actually giving real information. But of course, we're going to keep it entertaining and fun. And I want to focus on getting Esoteric Hollywood 3 done. And I can't do that if I do 6-hour debates every day. I'll never finish the book. Thank you for the Super Chats. If you guys would, remember to send Super Chats via Streamlabs. The Streamlabs link is in the show description. Also, too, I want to branch out into other things. We're working on, Jamie, I think, wants to put out another book as well. I want to do more live events. I really enjoy the performing of the cringecore songs. I want to expand the comedic stuff that I do, expand more of the stand-up type stuff that I do. So, I want to do others. I don't want to just do debates all the time. It's kind of boring. We also have some film analyses that we're going to do, because as I've gotten back into Esoteric Hollywood 3, this leads to Jamie and I watching other movies that we haven't seen and analyzed for the book. So the next film podcast that we will do is, we might still do the Vegas one, even though we ended up having the Vegas event before we did the Vegas podcast. We can still do it, though. But I think we're going to do Esoteric Gyllenhaal. I realized the other day we haven't actually done the Gyllenhaal corpus, the esoteric ones, in many, many years. The last Gyllenhaal I did was Nightcrawler with Sean Helton from 21st Century Wire, literally 10 years ago. So Jamie and I are going to do Nightcrawler, Donnie Darko, Prisoners, Life, which was terrible. I'm forgetting another one. And a couple other... Oh, Enemy. And I have to admit, somebody called me out years ago when I did an analysis of Jake Gyllenhaal, Enemy, the Denis Villeneuve movie. I have to admit, I was wrong. My analysis of Enemy was completely wrong. I got it wrong. And so we will be covering that, and I will be admitting I will be repenting of my vast heresy of Gyllenhaal orthodoxy and Villeneuve orthodoxy. I totally misunderstood and misinterpreted that movie. I had a great Gyllenhaal. I didn't like... Prisoners is one that we're going to do. I didn't like Source Code. That was a boring movie. Enemy is the spider movie. Donnie Darko is a classic, of course. So we're going to do Enemy, Donnie Darko, Prisoners, Nightcrawler, and I'm forgetting one other one. All right, let's get into... I've gotten a lot of things wrong. So it's good to try to... You want to try to have the humility to say, hey, you know what, I've been wrong. I can be wrong now. So it's good to have that openness. Let's get into Western mysticism and Hermeticism. And I think you guys are going to notice the patterns and the commonalities that we see. The ancient mysteries. We go back to ancient Greece as the beginning, according to this book. Now, you could find earlier precedents in Egypt, right? You could find precedents in Egypt for the mysteries of Greece, but typically people begin Western civilization, Western history, Western mysticism, esotericism as a place that begins with the Greeks for whatever reason. Maybe that's just an academic assumption, but if you guys want to support the show, you can do that by using the super chat function right there. So the scholar who covers the mystery section is Charles Stein, and he wrote a really interesting chapter based on his book analyzing the ancient mysteries from a religious perspective and the mysteries of Eleusinians. This is the Demeter and Persephone story. So this is the idea of the return to the descent into the other underworld, and then the return to life that mirrors the cycle of the seasons and the life-death cycle, life-death rebirth. Now he opines that this was not something that was necessarily. This is his theory. Basically, they had a kykeon, which is some scissor up, which is a big old jug of scissor up, with entheogens, hallucinogens, or some form of psychotropic agents in it. This kykeon is what would then lead the initiate, who had been studying for many, many months, perhaps many years, to be initiated into these mysteries. It would lead this person into an ecstatic state as he's led into the central inner sanctum of the temple hall, called the hall is called the telestrion. The Hierophant would then invoke the presence of the goddess. They would bring a big sort of ear of grain. This was supposed to signify Persephone had given birth to an infant, perhaps Dionysius in the underworld. She a damn baby mama of the underworld. You know what I'm saying? But Persephone, y'all know Persephone? She had got pregnant in the underworld and had given birth to Dionysius, and he ran off. So basically, baby mamas of the underworld. Now here's the crazy part. In the kykeon, these crafty hierophants would have a girl come on up in there who would disrobe. He doesn't say that he knows for sure if they're nude. I mean, I'm guessing so. They probably took a babe. You know what I mean? They're not going to bring in like some ham planet, but they probably found like some babe, brought her in. You're tripping balls as you've been brought into the inner sanctum. You don't know what the hell's going on. There's gongs, there's smoke and mirrors, there's who knows what, and then this goddess unsheathes her cloak in a holy night ceremony. It's like a weird version of Pascha, literally. There's the sacrifice of a pig, which mirrors the mysteries, as we know from the book of 3rd Maccabees, where Ptolemy does this very thing. There's a bunch of idols and a sacred orgiastic frenzy dance. And then this babe unsheathes. Now you might be tempted to think, well, was this all just kind of like a wild stripper ceremony? No. I mean, it might have elements of that, but it turns out the real meaning of the ceremony was to unveil to the initiate that the great mystery is that, I guess, the woman or who she represents, being itself. So the secret of the Eleusinian mysteries is that the vision that you see in this ecstatic state is a vision of being itself, which is supposed to be supposedly a version of Parmenides' philosophy. All is permanence, all is being. But also they tacked on this idea that you got to look inside, bro. Look inside yourself. Ultimately, the idea was achieving a union or a henosis, henotic union with all of being itself. And even outside of the Eleusinian mysteries, other mysteries celebrated this similar pattern in the Dionysian mysteries, or even the mysteries of Isis and Osiris, who corresponds to Demeter as well, or Persephone. This is where we get the Orphic mysteries. Orpheus was the legendary poet Magus, who served the classical world as the archetypal author of cosmological poetry and perhaps initiatory relevance. The Orphic mysteries utilize a soteriological function for the entire cosmos. Indeed, these were set later on to a Neoplatonic context, and Orphic cosmology focused on a solar theology of Dionysius, Zeus, Helios, and Phanes, who were compounded into a demiurgic figure at the outer bounds of the cosmos. The human soul then houses a struggle between the higher principle of Dionysius and the lower principle of the Titans. This propels the individual through a series of incarnations and inter-incarnational periods, so reincarnation. Thus, the soul must free itself from the bondage of this cosmic structure and achieve a higher and higher place amongst and beyond, eventually, the solar sphere. And so you have the journey of the soul away from the body. The Orphic texts recapitulate, elaborate, and vary the Hesiotic theogony with an emphasis on the situations that abuse temporal and logical order. Night here precedes the generation of the anthropomorphic gods, but is nevertheless generated by a specific divine pair, Dionysius, who precedes the creation of the giant Orphic egg. This is the egg of Plato. The serpent and the egg. You have probably seen this, and it is right here in the head of Rob Thomas. Rob Thomas's head is Plato's egg. But this is where we get the Ouroboros, by the way, from the Timaeus. So hopefully you can see that there, right? The Orphic egg and the Ouroboros, the snake around the egg. This is from Plato, but it's also from the Orphic Mysteries, and probably goes back to ancient Egypt as well. In Greek accounts of the gods, from Hesiod to Proclus, genealogical relations serve as metaphors for a causally and logically genetic sequence. Ancient genealogy stands for ontology. If X is the son of Y, this suggests that Y is for, say, cosmic space, and the source of the setting of X is Earth. So cosmic space gives birth to Earth. When such arrangements are disordered, the mythologium suggests an awareness of a deep mystery in the genealogy of an ontogenic process. So cosmic being, right, expresses the mystery of the individual in these Greek mysteries. The author then goes on to say that in the Orphic Mysteries, it may well be considered, as Henry Corbin says, the text itself is the secret. So the secret is, you are the secret. Again, because the secret is being itself. And we're going to notice that as we look through a lot of these texts, that's a common pattern for everyone. Now, the Pythagorean chapter was fascinating. In this chapter written by Dr. Jocelyn Godwin, Pythagoras also apparently is borrowing from the Egyptian mysteries. The idea of reincarnation, which is very central to Pythagoras, as well as the Orphic mysteries, probably comes from India, at least the scholar is speculating. Although we do see it present in Plato's Republic, as well as the harmony of the celestial spheres from Republic 617b to c. For those that don't know, this is the idea that the celestial spheres is what sort of governs and rules the universe. It's the spheres that the planets spin in, and that they're kind of a giant cosmological clock. But not only are the celestial spheres operating like a giant clock, they're also resonating at a different tonal frequency. So they're like musical instruments. Now the story is that Pythagoras got this idea after he thought about the sounds that were made from different strings being plucked. And so he strung up a bunch of hammers with different lengths of wire or string or whatever, and would pluck them and hit them with hammers. And he noticed there were different sounds being made. He also came up with the idea of the tetractys. And the tetractys is the idea of the 10 principles by which all number and all principle originates. So you have the monad that becomes the dyad becomes the triad, and this builds all the way up until 10. And you're going to notice that the same 10 will be prominent in a lot of philosophical systems, whether it's the Kabbalists and their 10 emanations, or whether it's the Porphyrian tree and the structures of the universe, or whether it's the 10 categories of Aristotle, or the way Kant repurposes these to be kind of psychological structures of the mind. The tetractys, or this idea of the decad, is very central to a lot of philosophical systems. Pythagoras was also a strong proponent of eugenics, interestingly, and the eugenic breeding of children. He believed not just in avoiding beans, probably because they made your ass fart, but also because, but also to have a lot of weird rules for his sect. So he actually had a sect that worshipped numbers. But he also believed in magical dance. I didn't know this. Did you know Pythagoras was basically a glee boy? I'm just joking. Hopefully he was. I don't know if he liked women or not. He admitted women to his cult, but I don't know if they were virgins or not. I don't know what his view of ladies was. But it is from Pythagoras that Plato gets reincarnation. Now, Plato was expelled from the Pythagorean Academy, supposedly, because apparently you weren't supposed to talk about the mysteries of the Pythagorean Academy. Plato talked about it, wrote about it, and so they booted him out. One of the key areas where Plato differed from Pythagoras was this. According to Aristotle, the main difference between Plato and the Pythagoreans were that Plato regarded numbers not as ultimate realities, but as intermediates between the sensible world and the realm of the forms. Plato's primary opposites were not limited versus unlimited, as with the Pythagoreans, but one versus dyad, 1 versus 2. So, relations of opposition. By the way, opposition in this way, or division in this way, is not typically the way that we think of the persons in the Trinity, and that's why it doesn't really work. It also relates to the logical problem of the Trinity, because the idea of counting by division, if you guys remember, we covered this with Dr. Branson, we covered this with the Jake debate. For the ancient medieval world, when they talked about counting, they typically counted by division. That means the 1 is the monad, and 2 represents opposition through division and dyad. So 2 is dyadic in ancient medieval counting, that is counting by division. So all the Thomists and all the people that were making a big deal about this 2 or 3 days ago, acting like I didn't know what I was talking about, it all relates back to counting by division. And that's why you can't just say that the triad is counted or differentiated by division. You can talk about relations and how there's distinctions, but it's not relations of opposition, because we don't introduce opposition, which is 2, which is a dyad, according to classical and medieval counting, into a triad. It doesn't make any sense. That's why the Cappadocians say that the dyad is transcended by the triad. But for Plato and for the Pythagoreans, they do have this idea of opposition that's dialectical. For example, God is opposite the world. The dyad is opposite the 1. So there's this opposition which differentiates. And opposition typically refers to division or composition, hence counting by division. But we don't speak of God that way, because God is not counted by division if we're talking about the divine essence. You can talk about distinctions in the triad, but a triad is not a dyad. So opposition doesn't work to distinguish, as at least the grounding, the fundamental way that we distinguish the persons. That's why it's by hypostatic origin, as the Cappadocians all unanimously say. Math and music are intimately connected according to the Apollonian mysteries, and so it would appear that Pythagoras was involved in the Apollonian mysteries. This author is a little weird and wild and out there in her quackademic speculations, so I'm not going to go into too much of that. But the pedagogical models of Pythagoras is where we get the quadrivium. That is the 4. Well, you have the 3 grammar, logic, rhetoric, or grammar, logic, math, right? Grammar, logic, arithmetic, and that becomes the basis for the quadrivium, which then builds on top of that. That's classical pedagogy. So the trivium, and then you have the quadrivium. So you have the basic 3, and then you have the 4 that build on top of that. That comes via Pythagoras eventually into Boethius. The maintenance of the Pythagorean tradition, she argues, is seen in people like Johann Kepler and Isaac Newton, who tried to maintain their alchemical hermetic tradition, I guess we could say. But a couple things she argues that we get from the Pythagorean tradition is the inverse square law and the diatonic scale. And that was because of the speculations originally of supposedly, or the legend at least, is that Pythagoras was trying to make a harmony between the different types of musical notes and what he thought was going on with the celestial spheres. I'm not going to go too much into the Parmenides and Plotinus, the Parmenides and Plato chapter, because I've done 2 different lecture talks on Plato. You can watch at my website and get the audios of the Plato talks that we did, which includes the entire Republic. I don't know, that was 10 years ago. And also my philosophy course, which is in the show description, which is a more fuller history of Western philosophy, 12 courses, 20-something hours of lectures and talks. You can get that course that goes deeper into Parmenides and Empedocles. So we're going to move on to Plotinus. Plotinus was a follower of Plato who wanted to reconcile Aristotle and Plato. So just like Aristotle wanted to answer the problems of the pre-Socratics and Plato, just like Plato wanted to answer the problems of the pre-Socratics, every time there's a new sort of philosopher guy, he wants to deal with the problems of the guys before. So naturally, Plotinus would want to make sense of both what Plato said and what Aristotle critiqued in Plato. For Plotinus, the idea was mystical union or ecstasy. And in a lot of the Platonic tradition, there's kind of a battle between, is the essence of Platonism something that's ritual, like iamblichus and ritual magic, or is it more of an inner state of meditation, like Plotinus? We're not worried with a bunch of rituals. So Plotinus thought that henosis, that is, achieving ultimate ecstasy with the one, the primordial source of being, that's really the essence of what we're trying to do. And so it's a flight from the body. The body isn't necessarily evil in this system. This is one of the critiques that Plotinus has of the Gnostics, is that matter is not bad, but matter is kind of at the base of being. And the soul wants to get back to true being, which is the one. So there are emanations and gradations from the one in Neoplatonism, at least in Plotinus. But rather than adopting the Gnostic system of saying that matter was inherently bad, there is no evil demiurge. There is an ascent of the soul back to henosis and union with the one. This is a pretty fascinating section that you may not be aware of next, which is that, did you know that Cyril of Alexandria wrote about, at least unless these are forgeries, I don't think they are, it comes from Cyril against Julian. So Contra Julianum by Cyril, unless this is pseudo-Cyril, I'm not sure, I'm not a textual scholar, but Cyril of Alexandria wrote about the Hermetic corpus. And the Hermetic corpus is a collection of some supposed 15 different texts. We're moving on to Hermeticism and Gnosticism next. Some of these texts include the Corpus Hermeticum, which is supposed to be 17 different books, the Latin text Asclepius, the only complete Hermetic text from the Middle Ages. Most of these, by the way, are only preserved in Coptic, which is fascinating. I'm not exactly sure what to make of that or why that is, but the Testimonia is a bunch of quotations from Hermetic works, preserved in Greek and Latin authors of late antiquity. The Coptic discourse of the Ogdoad and the Ennead. This was supposedly discovered, I think, in the Nag Hammadi text. And the Egyptian influence on the Hermetica is supposedly proven by the discovery of the Ogdoad and the Ennead. So in other words, most people thought this originated with a Greek origin until this Nag Hammadi text, I think, of the Ogdoad and the Ennead. Another text is the definitions of Hermes Trismegistus. So there's kind of like this body of books that are kind of all sort of all over the place and dubious in their. We don't know what the original Hermetic text was or Hermetic corpus was, but probably has Hermetic root or Egyptian roots. Excuse me. Remember to let's keep the chat in line. Thank you guys. Welcome. Glad you like the new do. Appreciate it. If you guys want to support the show, you can do it via Streamlabs and the Superchats. Now, if the text from Cyril is authentic, I think, as far as I know, it probably is. I'm not, even though I'm getting this from gnosis.org, I'm not a big fan of this website, but it's on a bunch of different websites. So you can find, it's on Tertullian.org, which has a lot of patristic translations. But you'll note that Cyril talks about Hermes. Now, Cyril has an interesting theory that Plato and Pythagoras got their views from Moses. Interesting. And I've opined at various times that might be the case. I didn't actually know Cyril said that. And so Cyril has another treatise, I think, that he refers to. Oh, this is ascribed to Iamblichus, and he refers to On the Mysteries. So even Saint Cyril of Alexandria was aware of these texts, comments on them, and says, even though it's not exactly orthodox, it does appear that whoever the author of these texts was, maybe they were influenced by Moses and the prophets. What's the core doctrine? Now, we're going to see the problem with this too. So I am not advocating these texts because they're actually problematic. Yes, my books are available in Europe. If you get them from the website, you get signed copies. It just costs more from the website because you have to pay like crazy shipping. Yeah, I understand. So the scholarly tendency, Luigi, was to say that the Corpus Hermeticum was fully Greek, but then they have this new theory that it's also based on Egyptian stuff because of the discovery of the text, the discourse on the Ogdoad and Ennead. I don't know. I don't have any set position on. I'm not that worried about this because we're going to see in a second that Hermetic corpus is. It's got some janky stuff in it. Okay, there's some stank ass stuff in this text. It begins interestingly with a teleological argument. The basic core doctrine of the Hermetic corpus or Hermeticism in this sense is that there is a indissoluble relationship between God and the cosmos, between God and man, which implies the unity of the universe. God is the source of all being, which encompasses everything that exists. God is within himself. The world is in God, and man is in the world. The Hermetics here share the Stoic idea that the beauty and perfection of the world, teleology, prove the existence of a perfect creator. So we have, again, an assumption of the metaphysics of perfection. We have a kind of teleological argument, and then this leads us to a creator. They were not primarily interested, however, in abstract philosophical ponderings, but a practical, pious form of theology. According to these texts, God's essence exists eternally in creating everything. So here we have a problem again with this notion of eternal creation. Which, as Basil says, would give rise to some kind of dyad or to the Neoplatonian type of position. Also, though, it gets even crazier. Get this. Now, pay attention because this is going to come up later. The original text says that God the Father is eternally pregnant. The reason he's eternally pregnant is because he's eternally creating. Thus, the eternally creating God is an androgynous being. And this is closely connected to the view that God has been born out of himself. According to Lactantius, Hermes called God him who is without not only him without father, but also without mother, and that he is his own father and his own mother. So while you might be tempted to think, well, wait a minute, it sounds like God from God, like the generation of the Son. Not really. It's weirder than that. It's God without being, or excuse me, without father and without mother, who gives birth to himself out of a primal, androgynous, self-created creator. Thus, this idea is not actually Greek in origin, according to these scholars, but Egyptian. Thus, the same holds for the bold sexual language to describe the process of creation. In other words, this then explains, supposedly, why there is this sex component to the world religions. This could be very amenable to Freemasonry, right, which worships the generative principle. Yep, WW, you're already way ahead of me. Does it sound like Baphomet? Yes, it does. Why does it sound like Baphomet? Well, Baphomet pulls from these sources. Now, guess what? It's not just Baphomet that pulls from this source. Kabbalah has the same argument and source, as we will see in just 1 second. And I don't want to make anybody mad, but we have to be honest here. Father Deacon Patrick, Dr. Patrick, has a book also critiquing Maximus and I think Gregory of Nyssa. So, unfortunately, and we don't believe that Maximus is infallible or that Nyssa is infallible, they also held to the view, because this view influences the Neoplatonists. And the idea of the Neoplatonists is that whatever the primordial unity is, it's metaphysically superior to differentiation into gender. Now, we have to talk about this because people from Fordham, for example, will utilize Maximus and Gregory Nyssa to try, I'm not kidding, to try to prove trans gender things. Unfortunately, they do believe that the original status of Adam and Eve was non-sexual or non-biologically gendered. I just simply think Maximus and Nyssa were wrong, and they were influenced by philosophical concepts like we see here. Now, and certainly they weren't interested in pushing any trans agenda, so we can keep that in mind. But when I was at Sophia, Deacon Patrick presented a, this is the guy, if you don't remember, that came on with me to talk about women's deaconesses and all this priestesses stuff, right? And also I think this might be an Origin. Did he do Origin's Revenge? I think it's his book. Let me find that. Yes. So this is Deacon Patrick's book where he covers this. So I heard him present the paper before this was in print. I think is the way it works. So if you're interested in this topic, Deacon Patrick covers it here. It's also mentioned, by the way, if I recall, in Genesis Creation, Early Man, where he talks about some fathers saying that gender precedes the fall, and then other fathers like Maximus and Nyssa saying that gender is after the fall. I do not think gender is after the fall. I think Genesis very clearly differentiates man and woman before the fall. But we can see an influence from philosophical concepts upon some of the from at least on Nyssa and Maximus. Now, this primordial being is bisexual. And it says, wait, what are you laughing at? This is the Hermetic corpus. So everybody just wants to have just weird. Now here's the problem, though. You might think, well, if the Hermetic corpus says God is bisexual, then they're a bunch of ancient coomers. No. Turns out the Hermetic corpus is anti-sexuality. So let's see how they get to this reasoning. According to the Hermetic anthropology, the human being has a twofold nature: the earthly mortal body and the divine immortal mind or soul. This leads in some cases to a negative evaluation of the material world, of course, and of a negative evaluation of the body and procreation. Thus, some of the texts say, quote, "He who behaves well towards his body is bad towards his soul. He who himself is immortal and has sexual desires is the cause of death." So sex itself is the cause of death. According to these texts, all living beings originally were created in an androgynous body. This is the Neoplatonic idea, and this is what Nyssa and Maximus say. It was only after a cycle of time had passed that they were severed into two and became male and female. The Asclepius text has a more positive view, however, of the human condition. Man is a great wonder, a living being to be worshipped and honored. The same text declares that the sexual union of man and woman is the greatest affection, the greatest pleasure, the greatest desire, and it is itself heavenly love. To be a divine mystery, then, reflects not only the fecundity and the androgyny of God, but leads man and woman to the experience of their own original androgyny. Weird to me. I mean, again, I think this is just simply not true. Like, I also suspect that the where Nyssa especially might have been influenced by with that idea is Origen. So we know that Nyssa was influenced by Origen's view of apokatastasis, and I'm not saying that he necessarily had in total Origen's view of apokatastasis, but at least we know that that influence is there. So it's very plausible that he was probably also influenced by Origen's view, which was neo-platonism. We all know that, right? That the original man and woman was an androgynous Adam Kadmon. Now, I'm not saying they were Kabbalists, but Kabbalists also have the view that Adam Kadmon is the androgynous original created being who split into two after the fall. That is, again, from the Hermetic corpus. It's also a Platonic idea. Plato talks about the original androgyny. And my point is this. All of that is contrary to what the actual text of Genesis 1 and 2 says. And remember, Origen's view of Genesis is that it's not a literal creation. And the Sixth Ecumenical Council condemns Origen's view of creation and his whole system in a 4-page condemnation in the Confession of St. Sophronius. So if you want to... So I think to be consistent, we have to go with what... We have to... I mean, this is just crazy stuff. It's philosophical speculation and not what is in Revelation. All right. Next up is the aeons of Gnosticism. So after Hermeticism, we have a discussion of Gnosticism. I won't go too much into this. We've done talks on Gnosticism in the past. It's pretty much a giant mix of a bunch of weird myths and stories, and you will find some commonalities with what we've already discussed with Neoplatonism, Platonism, and the Hermetic corpus. But Gnostics differed from those in saying that this reality was ultimately kind of itself evil. So Gnosticism is moving more in the direction of saying, all right, let's look for an account for evil, theodicy, the problem of evil, beyond what we've seen in these other philosophers, and let's just go ahead and say that matter itself is evil. So perhaps a dualistic sort of, perhaps even a Zoroastrian influence, not that Zoroastrians necessarily said matter is evil, but we're starting to look for ways to account for evil as if evil is being or substance itself. So there's many texts. There's many systems of the Gnostics. Irenaeus, of course, lists them all in hundreds of pages, first few hundred pages of Against Heresies. But we find things like an original unknowable God, the Aperon, the Beyond, who reveals himself in a series of aeons. So instead of emanations, instead of Sephirot in the Kabbalah, here we have what they call the pleroma. The pleroma of aeons, by which the fullness of the fullness is the pleroma, the Aperon, the Beyond being. And then it comes down to us through these divine entities called aeons. The original highest divine beings are Father, Mother, Son, according to many of the Gnostic texts. But there's not any one Gnostic system to go to. There's the Sethites, there's the Ophites, there's the Valentinians, and many more that are listed by Irenaeus. So there's not one Gnostic system. But the commonalities are the notion of the pleroma, the notion of matter being evil, and that ultimately the goal of human salvation is escape from the body and escape from matter. This is achieved not through bodily exercises, but through secret knowledge or gnosis. Jesus then, in many of these systems, becomes the kind of initiator par excellence who tells us the secret stories and the secret mysteries by which we can... I'll just read what it says. Christ then becomes not a savior who remits sins, but saves us from ignorance. This is because of their low self-esteem for the body, low esteem for the body. The Gnostics ascribe most of salvation to this inner process and transition through knowledge, through gnosis. Valentinian Gnostics, for example, developed a rather complex doctrine of salvation, which distinguished between three Jesuses: one who imparted salvific gnosis to various mystical realms, the pneumatic Jesus, or the pleroma, and the Savior Jesus, who saves the fallen Sophia goddess. This happens in the psychic realm. Jesus Christ sends spiritual seeds to the world of matter to regather it back into the divine pleroma. So you're noticing that for a lot of these texts and mysteries, we're beginning to see that you got to absorb back into the one, henosis, like the Platonist said, like Plotinus said. You're stuck in a prison world. Goo babies?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Cosmic goo babies.
Okay. Okay. Could you make me a double shot, please? And don't put any pleroma in it.
Goo my baby.
Don't put any cosmic goo in my double shot, please.
I love goo.
All right. So there's Gnosticism, and as you can imagine, it's kind of a ridiculous bunch of mythology going on, but we're going to come next, I think, to this stuff. Let me clear my throat. Irenaeus quoting DMX. Welcome, everybody. What do you guys think? Could you put some Manuka honey in it? The allergies are off the charts again today. Jamie? Jamie? Can you put some Manuka honey in it? That way I can hack up all this stuff for you guys live on stream. All right, we got a few super chats. Glocktavius, $25. If I join your site, do I get feet pics? You don't have to join my site to see a foot. Although I've not trimmed my toenails, you can see it right here. What do you think of that? Was that actually my foot, or is that like a trick foot that I carry in my pocket that pops up? You'll never know. You'll never know. If you do join my website, you get free access to my yogurt pants clips and videos on my OF. Lucador 1764. $5. Have you seen Amon Hillman interview with Janny Jones podcast on Christianity? It gets 1 million views. No, I've not seen that. Evgenia, $5. Thank you for amazing topics. Comedy, defending the faith. Thank you. Appreciate that. Dacian, $10. I unintentionally took a break from YouTube. I missed the Jay Dyer content. Thank you. Appreciate that. I'm glad to see that a lot has been going on. The channel has grown. The new haircut rocks. Thank you. Did you miss the entire year of Fabio, John Depp, Captain Jack Sparrow, Florida Man phase? And then yesterday we transitioned into One Day of Ragnarok. And now we've transitioned back to classic James Bond style. So, hope you guys like it. It's really, I mean, it was just too hot, dude. I mean, it was like, we went to Vegas, and when we were in Vegas for the Vegas event, it was 110 degrees every day that we were there almost. I did get heat sickness. I got sick one night from getting overheated. It was pretty wild. There was, we were leaving, we went to see Piff, Mr. Piff. I don't know, you guys have seen the comedy magic act. It was pretty funny. And when we were leaving, it got really hot in the parking garage. I was getting even, because it was even hotter in the garage than it was at night, even being like 105 at night. I got overheated in the parking garage, and when we were leaving, the lights were like everywhere, blasting my eyes. I was a little probably dehydrated, and part of my vision started going out. And so I knew that, like, okay, if my vision's going out, like, this is turning into like a minor heat issue. So we had to drive home, and I was sick for the rest of the night. Basically feels like a fever. You should go for the Luke Skywalker hairdo. I had the Luke Skywalker in high school. I'll try to find that picture for you guys one time. Like, first couple years of high school, I had the kind of shaggy Luke in Star Wars A New Hope. But no, I'm ready for something different. I'm ready to go for like, I'm ready to go full Caesar cut, dude. Why not? Nobody else has a Caesar cut right now. You know what I'm saying? 116 in Vegas. I can believe it. I mean, it was one other time, Jamie and I took a road trip, and we went to Hemet, California, where she used to live, and it was 118 in Hemet because it's on the desert side. It's over by like Death Valley or whatever. I got heat fever. It's like having the fever. Like, you actually can get sick. And anyway, all right. Next chapter was fascinating because it's very relevant to us, which was early Jewish mysticism. What was the Jewish view of mysticism in the, say, prior to Christ, right? So let's say the intertestamental period, or even a little bit before that, up into the major minor prophets. We'll say the major minor prophets, intertestamental period, and then at the time of Christ. What was the view of Judaism at that time for mysticism? This was a very fascinating chapter because so much of this lines up with what we believe in Orthodoxy. So, for example, many of the original, what she calls the original mystics, pointed to the text of Ezekiel 1 through 10. This is not, as the History Channel and Eric von Daniken thinks, these are not alien ships or crafts. They are the cherubim. So Ezekiel, we would say, is seeing the cherub, or the chariot it's called chariot mysticism. This is why we call it the angel chariot that the Son of Man rides there in Ezekiel 1 through 10. And it's also referred to as the Hekkalot literature, or sometimes what's called angelic liturgy literature. This is the idea that the angels participate in the liturgy and the worship of Israel. And then some of the Jewish mystics went too far and, for example, thought that because the text in Genesis 5 says that Enoch was translated, that Enoch became Metatron. I don't know where anybody would get this idea, but some of the Jewish mystics, for example, during this time period, which this is pre-Kabbalah, Kabbalah does in a way relate to some of these things, believed, for example, that God had a body. So this would probably come from the Theophanies text, right? Some of the mystics saw, well, the text in Genesis says that God was walking with Adam and Eve in the cool of the garden, so God must have a body. This idea of God having a body then becomes the idea of a gigantic body, because God couldn't have a small body. He must be a giant. In some of these descriptions, the attained divine mysteries include knowing the dimensions of God's gigantic body. Yes, it's that ridiculous. So you actually know the measurements. I will tell you the measurements of the Holy One. The height of the soles of his shoes are 3,000 parsangs. Who knows what a parsang is? But this, by the way, sounds pretty similar to the Salafi tradition of God having a body and an uncreated foot. And I mean, the text does say that it's a theophany. So there is some way in which God is in time and space, and he's doing this in a theophanic way. And this, in the Orthodox view, it becomes the foreshadowing and the prefiguring, not that it's a symbol of the incarnation. The incarnation is the exact same principle of the theophanies. So if you have a problem with a theophany, it's literally no different than you're having problems with the incarnation itself. But we learned that in the Jewish tradition, for example, there's a hierarchy of celestial priests and angels in heaven conducting the worship in heaven. This is performing the true liturgy in the temple, or the Kedusha, presenting offerings to God, and thus there's a heavenly Day of Atonement. Well, doesn't that sound exactly like Hebrews 7? So isn't it interesting that because there was no temple in many periods, the rabbis and the rabbinical tradition were saying, well, how do we have atonement? Well, they would say doing good works stands in for not having the animal sacrifices. Oh, that's exactly what we say. So several segments at this time envision a link between the celestial and earthly realms through the transforming of the ritual world of the destroyed temple in Jerusalem. So after 70 AD, or 585, 586 BC, when the temple's first destroyed, the Babylonians, how do we explain the way to be reconciled and have liturgical worship? Well, it's the temple on earth is said in the revelation to Moses that Moses patterned it on the temple in heaven. But why then would Jews have a problem with what Christians do if Christians are using their very arguments about the worship on earth being the worship in heaven? So you see the logic here, right? Jews are saying, we don't have a temple. How can we be reconciled to God? How is there a liturgy? Oh, well, you do good works, and that counts for it, and also there's a liturgy in heaven. That's the Christian view. All right, moving on. And I'm not doing every chapter because not every chapter is that relevant, and I can't do them all. But thank you for those super chats. Appreciate that, you guys. Storm of the Cat, $5. Are Muslims a kind of Judaizer? Yes, exactly. That's the point. Part of this, right? Because as we can see, they appear. Well, actually, the Gabriel Said Reynolds book shows very clearly that Muhammad is influenced by many Talmudic stories, right? So there's actual Talmudic stories that influence the Quran. The arbitrary animal diet restrictions absolutely influences the Quran. The ritual washings are there, but there's no real meaning or explanation as to why you do these things. So in the Jewish and Christian ideas of those things, there is a meaning and a significance to why you would do them. I would argue that Judaism's view is more consistent than Muslims on that, but they don't even understand or have a basis really as to why you would do these things. So for example, in Hasidic communities now, today, you see them doing all these things that are really bizarre and sort of like they don't have any purpose, like you can't go outside on the Sabbath, so we'll put a string around the neighborhood to make it an enclosement so that we can go outside. I mean, it's just kind of like all these absurdities and this things that have no rational sense at all, but you do them to do them. But at least in the Jewish idea, there's still a notion that it relates to the religious covenant and something to do with the Messiah, even though they've got it all wrong and the Messiah's come, right? But in the Muslim tradition or in ideas, like they've imported kind of arbitrarily all of these ceremonial things, washings and wudu or whatever, and if you fart during prayers, you have to go wash because you've invalidated the prayer. Just stupid stuff, right? There's no sense to these things. You just do them because Allah says to do them. They don't have any purpose. But in Christianity, at least, the ceremonial laws had a pedagogical purpose, a typological purpose, a symbolic moral purpose. So Paul says, not sewing two garments together is a moral principle, not about garments, but about good and evil not being trying to join good and evil. So at least that makes moral sense as to why. So we're going to move on to fascinating section about Kabbalah. And we're going to see that Kabbalah in many ways, well, there's not one Kabbalah, first of all. So let's understand that people say this all the time, and that, you're a Kabbalist or this, that. Kabbalism is an importation of Gnosticism and neo-platonism, and probably even elements of the Hermetic corpus, as we've seen. So no, we don't believe anything akin to the fundamental principles of Kabbalism. We don't believe in reincarnation. We don't believe that God had a androgynous body. We don't believe that there are 10 hypostases or sephirot per se. We don't believe that good and evil are like flip sides of the same coin, which some of the Kabbalists have said. So there's not really anything. We don't believe God's bisexual. We don't believe any of this. So those are kind of pretty common Kabbalistic ideas that we don't believe. However, there are some interesting admissions amongst Kabbalist texts, traditions, and rabbis and theologians, which actually admit many of our points. For example, that God is not a strict Unitarian being, but in fact might be three lights and then other energies or powers or hypostases that come from the first three. Oh, interesting. Then why do you have a problem with the Trinity? And if you're going to be consistent, if the Trinity is wrong, then excommunicate every Kabbalist rabbi who also speculates on God having 10 hypostases. So basically, we can demystify this. People think Kabbalism is some super crazy, deep, insane. Actually, it's not that different from Neoplatonism or the idea of emanationism. In Kabbalism, the basic idea is, first of all, to deal with the problem of God's immanence and God's transcendence. How can we reconcile the fact that God is very different from the world, other than the world, but yet in some way has to come into the world to tell us about him, to show us his character, to reveal his attributes, and to reveal his Torah? How can we know God? Well, for most theologians of the rabbinic tradition who discuss this, they begin by saying that there is a hidden aspect of God. This they call Ein Sof, which means the boundless or the without end. You will immediately recognize that this is the Aperon. When I covered the pre-Socratics, or when we talk about, I think even Dionysius, right? Dionysius uses the term the boundless, the beyond being. This is the same idea. So the Kabbalist rabbis are saying, okay, God has this essence, this inner being that we don't know. And it literally says that they were using the via negativa theology that was popular in the 11th century. For example, Neoplatonist philosophers and theologians in the 11th century, like Bachya ibn Pakuda, as well as the rationalist Rabbi Moses Rambam Maimonides, said, first and foremost, God must be negated from everything created. And this gives us the idea, not in a definitional sense, but in a apophatic sense, that God's essence is beyond all being and beyond creatures. Same idea in Orthodoxy, same idea in Dionysius, Same idea that we say that just simply when Moses went up on the mountain, he didn't see God's essence. But God does reveal himself. How do we make sense of that, since he is the infinite one? Well, according to many Kabbalists, the bridge of this abyss is crossed through knowing knowable potentialities or potencies called the Sephirot. This term first appears in the Sefer Yetzirah, and it seemingly relates to a primordial account rather than God's manifestation. By contrast, medieval Kabbalists then cast the Sephirot as 10 divine hypostases that emanate from the clear light of Ein Sof, the endless, boundless, pure light of God's essence. These emanations then come in a sequential manner of increasing opacity. Paradoxically, the more opaque they become, the clearer they are to human comprehension. These 10 emanations are Keter, Chokhmah, Binah, Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, Netzah, Chad, Yesod, Malkut. Now, the odd part of this is that some of these are feminine. So they argue that God has feminine aspects, attributes, and categories. Let's see. Wisdom, for example, is considered the supernal father. That's the second emanation. Binah, or understanding, and that would probably be Sophia, is considered the feminine womb, the feminine supernal mother. And then there's some others like Gevurah, or might, that is also considered divine feminine. And then this other one called Netzah, eternity, which is feminine triumphalism. I don't know what that means or where, but you're starting to see the point that the idea now becomes the gender of the attributes. If one of these attributes has a feminine gender in terms of the term, then the theological reading into it, they read metaphysical meaning into that. However, whether the Sephirot or the emanations are essentially divine or instruments of God is hotly debated. Are they God, or are they created mediums of God acting? Doesn't this sound like the debate between the essence and energy distinction? I'm not saying it's the same identical debate. I'm saying that these rabbis were struggling with accounting for God's presence in the world and his transcendence. That is essentially what the essence energy distinction is interested in solving. I don't believe they solved it. They don't have the essence energy distinction. But it sounds like the debate, so that the debate between rabbis is analogous kind of to the debate that we have with the Thomists. However, many saw a problem, for example, with the inherent heresy in treating the emanations or the Sephirot as separate powers. So you can't say they're separate. So they have to be manifold manifestations of the one God. Now, this is beginning to sound just like the debate with the Muslims. Are Allah's attributes identical to Allah or distinct from Allah? And certainly they're not, quote, separate. Well, we wouldn't say that God's energies or attributes are separate. So are you starting to see that everybody's having to account for the same metaphysical problems in how God is transcendent and immanent and how God is one and many? The Sephirotic decad is actually one, and the apparent distinctions demand harmony and give rise to a remarkable polarity or a bisexual structure in the Kabbalistic notion of the Godhead itself. So now we have again this return to the Hermetic corpus, that God is inherently an androgynous bisexual being. Yes, this is where the image of Baphomet would come. But remember, Plato and Egyptian theology and the Hermetic corpus are far prior to Kabbalism. So the real origin of this isn't rabbis, it's Plato and Egyptian theology. And it even admits that this comes from Plato. Rabbinic tradition noticed this discrepancy, for example, in the two different accounts of the creation of Adam and Eve. It offered a theory of original androgyny as the explanation. And just like the character Aristophanes in Plato's Symposium, humanity, the rabbi said, were indeed originally created simultaneously male and female. But instead of it, excuse me, let me rephrase that. Humanity, the rabbi said, was indeed created as male and female, as Genesis 1 says, but rather were also a single entity that was then divided, which is the account in chapter Genesis 2. Thus, the rabbi said, this dual countenance means that there is a bisexual nature to primordial man. Kabbalists took this even further and noted that God created man in his image. If man was made in the image of God, then we can read back into God the created elements. Thus, God also must have male and female aspects. This is getting wild. Abraham ben David has a statement often quoted that is variously interpreted by scholars as a statement of an inseparable unity within God, a necessary separation for the sake of equal cooperation of these two powers, and a statement of necessary incorporation of the female into the prioritized male. Whatever the case may be, the Godhead itself here is clearly cast as a bisexual polarity in need of a unitive harmony. There you go. It's almost like it all goes back to Genesis. For the 13th century prophetic Kabbalist Abraham Abulafia, this guy's calling him prophetic, and other philosophically inclined authors such as the 16th century Yohanan Alamano and Leon Eberio, this bisexual polarity represents the intellect as the formal masculine element that came from God, which impregnates the material feminine body created by God. In an idyllic state, the two elements are completely unified, with the feminine ultimately subordinate to the masculine. On various levels, both the microcosmic and the macrocosmic restoration, woman will ideally return to man from whom she was taken. So you see the silliness of this metaphysical nonsense, which is that, well, if that's the case, then in the eschaton, women have to absorb back into men because they're taken from the side. This is just stupid. No, you have to be resorbed into me like that X-File. You remember that X-File where they go to the circus and there's a dude that comes out of another dude's body? Remember that one? I forget the name of that X-Files. But there you go. Now think of all the low-tier goobers over the years who've accused me of, oh, you believe in Kabbalism. I've never thought God was bisexual. I've never thought that gender was a result of the fall. I've never thought that reincarnation is true. I've never thought that, what else? God has 10 hypostases. By the way, why is it wrong to say God has 3 hypostases if you can say God has 10 hypostases? Now, moving on past God's bisexuality according to this Platonic and Kabbalistic view. This, by the way, is where they get the idea that there's a divine Sophia. Did you catch that? Bulgakov, divine Sophia. And I want to say that, did they also say that divine Sophia as a feminine principle in God comes from Kabbalism and from apparently perhaps Platonism or Gnosticism. Now, I'm trying to find in the Jacob Boehme chapter, does Jacob Boehme think that there is a feminine Sophia principle? Seems like he said there was. I'm trying to remember. We know Jacob Boehme was reading Kabbalists. Here, now listen to this. This is under Jacob Boehme. Man becomes a little Christ incarnate. This is not being understood in like an orthodox sense. It's being understood in like a weird. All of these mystics say the same stuff. You become God. That's all this is. Like in an identity sense, not in a grace sense. The unconscious darkness or the sleep of self-will must die, according to Boehme, so that the soul might be awakened. Just as God must die to his dark will before God can be born. What? Man must die to his dark will to be born again in Christ. As the case with many German mystics, Jacob Boehme intimates the birth of Christ in the soul so that man becomes Christ, becoming God incarnate. However, salvation is not a permanent condition that is once for all reached. Man simply rests in. Instead, Boehme portrays man's awakening as a perpetual struggle. This would come as no surprise to us, as we have seen that for Boehme, the struggle is written into the very nature of being itself. As Walsh observes, the function of Christ, according to Boehme, is no longer atonement by making reparation for man to God. It now includes the revelation of man's rightful spiritual place in union with Virgin Sophia, in whom all things are contained. So, although I have not read enough Bulgakov to know, and I don't care to, I would suggest and consider that perhaps Bulgakov was reading Jacob Boehme and the Kabbalists, because what Jacob Boehme says is identical to what we're reading in the Kabbalists, who believe that God has feminine emanations, one of whom is Sophia. Now this is fascinating because, again, we can see why would a rabbi, if they believe and tolerate in their system the idea that the Torah itself is God's word, God's living word, and even God incarnate, why would you have a problem with the Logos being incarnate? You see what I'm saying? Kabbalists, for example, in many cases, they would hypostatize the Torah. Torah is a divine hypostasis. Right? Wait a minute. I thought Jesus is a living Torah. Exactly. One of the reasons they sought to do this was to help to solve and overcome immanence and transcendence issues. How do we know God? Well, God has revealed himself within time and space in Torah. Torah is God for some of these. Now here's where it gets kind of bizarre, because the Torah is so deep, and because it is in fact ultimately infinite, and because the covenant in Deuteronomy 29 was made with all of the souls of Israel, 600,000 present, every individual soul of Israel can have their own experience of Torah, and so there is no one single meaning of Torah. So it's relativized. Now, I know that they would say, well, not totally, maybe. But the guy who's the scholar writing this essay goes on to say, well, if there are a multitude of individual understandings of Torah, then it's an infinite possibility of experiences and interpretations of Torah. So notice now the text is relativized. But wait a minute, if there's an infinity placed within time and space in a Torah, well, that just sounds exactly like one of the problems that you critique Christians for, saying that God, who's infinite, can't be in time and space. You can't have the infinite in a specific place in time and space. That would be a contradiction. Oh, but you say the exact same thing for the Torah itself, you see. Medieval Kabbalists believed in the four senses of Scripture. The four, right? The literal sense, and then all the way up to the anagogical, the allegorical, the moral, etc. . But interestingly, some of them argued over this because they were trying to figure out whether or not the literal sense is the foundation of all the spiritual senses. You find all the same things in medieval Christian exegesis as well. But what was the point of this secret teaching? Well, the secret teaching here of Torah is called the oral Torah, and Kabbalah is an essential element to oral teaching. And even some of the rabbis went so far as to say that no one outside of Israel can even understand these texts because the Gentiles are husks. Their souls are husk souls, and they come from the forces who fought against God, I guess because of reincarnation. But the souls of every Israelite are souls that emanate from God himself. Thus, Israel is the body of God, and Israel is also a divine hypostasis. So why would you have a problem with theosis if you believe in some of your rabbinical teachings that Israel is the body of God and is now a, quote, divine hypostasis? We wouldn't say that the church is a divine hypostasis. We would say it's the body of Christ, but that's the same teaching that you have about Israel. And the idea of the church as the bride is literally coming from the Old Testament text of Israel as God's bride. And Israel is the body of God. Now, we covered this in the Benjamin Summers text, where Summers goes through the bodies of God throughout the Old Testament texts. Again, many of which admits our positions. This is an interesting element that I think we would agree with too, which is not the Kabbalist position, but this idea that from the Jewish perspective, and I don't think this is restricted to Kabbalists, I think this actually goes back to the way Hebrew theology and praxis operated even before Christ. There's a three-tiered pyramid, or not tiered, there's 3 points to this triangle of how the text and the community works. There's the oral tradition, there's the written text, and then there's the living interpreters of Israel and the rabbis. So notice that three-tiered system, the exact same approach, for example, in, well, to be fair, Orthodoxy and even Catholicism, right? You have the oral teaching, you have the written texts that are accepted, and then you have the living community which interprets those texts. For the Jews, according to this scholar, it was always understood that way. So it would thus be natural that this three-tiered model of community, text, and oral tradition all kind of goes hand in hand. If you're enjoying tonight's talk, I appreciate that. If you would hit like and share, we're working our way through. People are asking, what book is he reading? It's in the description. So I don't know why people don't know how to click and read the show descriptions. YouTube has always operated this way. It's this 450-page book that we've read most of on the way to Vegas and back. Western Mysticism and Hermeticism, the Cambridge Companion, Cambridge Handbook. So we got a great survey going in this text of a lot of the different traditions, and it really backs up a lot of what we have analyzed and what we've said and positions that we've come to over the last several years. So next up, I want to talk about the very important section that I mentioned in the Lord Voldemort hours. Medieval Christian mysticism in the Latin West. Now, it's interesting, this scholar, Dr. Bruce Milam, he didn't go into anybody in the East. Not that it really bothers me, and I don't have a problem admitting that, okay, there might be some, I'm sure there are Eastern mystics in Byzantium who went too far. I don't know of any, but I wouldn't be surprised. But what we're going to notice is a pattern of principles of Platonism, Hermeticism, neo-platonism, Gnosticism, you could even argue, that make pantheism, that make their way into the medieval Latin mystics. Now, not all of them are considered, quote, saints by the Roman Catholic Church, but even the ones that are not saints were very influential throughout the medieval world. So who are some of these famous medieval mystics? Well, according to Dr. Milam, the early influences begin in the West with Augustine. Now, we don't typically think of Augustine as principally a mystic theologian, although those elements are there because of the influence of Neoplatonism. And as I read from the Yves Congar article, after a bunch of the hubbub, which is all a bunch of nonsense, even Congar has a giant essay discussing Augustine's view and approach to the Trinity, which is different from the Cappadocians in the East. So nothing that I said in that attempted discussion or on Twitter was even controversial. So a lot of people have no idea or no knowledge of these topics, and they like to quote mine, and then they'll throw up a bunch of dust and hubbub about something that's not even controversial. And the entire Congar essay admits all of my points as a famous Roman Catholic. So I don't agree with Congar in the sense of like, he's basically trying to say that, look, we all believe the same thing. Okay, I don't believe that. But Congar admits that the Augustinian approach is Neoplatonic and it's not the Cappadocian approach. Exactly. And it's Neoplatonic ideas of dialecticism and opposition that give rise to the eventual medieval idea of relations of opposition in Aquinas as a proof for filioque. And that we don't accept and cannot accept. So the quote that Erbara and other people put up, which is a bizarre translation, by the way, that's not really what's in the actual text of Basil, because I showed this on the live stream we did the other day. Augustine is a figure of mysticism as well, precisely because of the Neoplatonic influences on him. This is why Augustine's account of the filioque on the Trinity is almost a direct copy and paste from, I think it's Aeneid's. I haven't looked at the Aeneid's in so long, but it's either Aeneid 5 or 6. And Augustine literally just copies and pastes that. And that's why Congar says that Augustine is literally just getting it from Plotinus. What does he say? The Greeks thought of consubstantiality in terms of monarchia of the Father. As we have seen, the Greek fathers are familiar with the category of relationship, particularly Gregory the theologian. The concept, however, plays only an occasional part in their writings, whereas in Augustine and Aquinas, it is used to justify the diversity of the hypostases. The Greeks appealed to the particular character of each hypostasis, in other words, the hypostatic properties. So nothing that I said was even controversial. It's even admitted by some of their top theologians. But I wanted to find that section where he admits Duroy does not deny the validity of de Renan's insight, but points to another origin of difference in the case of Augustine, who had undoubtedly had the powerful influence on later Latin theology. Augustine discovered the Trinity in the works of the Neoplatonists before him. So Augustine's Trinity is the logical conclusion of Neoplatonism. So even the top Roman Catholic theologians admit what I was saying, and it's not even controversial. But you have a bunch of 20-year-olds who haven't looked into this for a long time, and they look for something controversial, and they look for a quote mine, and then spin up all this dust as if it's a gotcha. It's just really immature and stupid. But back to the text. So Augustine is not essentially primarily a mystic, but there are elements in his theology, particularly the Neoplatonic elements, which allow for a direct mystical encounter with God, more so perhaps from his confessions, where Augustine speaks at times of this kind of a miraculous encounter, shall we say. But after Augustine, really the key figure of mysticism in the West is John Scotus Erigena, who ended up with sort of pantheistic and heterodox ideas. But John Scotus Erigena, interestingly, was a Western person way influenced by Eastern theology, believe it or not. But I don't think he was successful in how he synthesized. The real mystic that we have to begin with is, of course, the character of Bernard of Clairvaux. And back when I was Roman Catholic, I liked Bernard quite a bit. So I read about him a lot. I have multiple commentary. I have his entire commentary on Song of Songs. I have multiple scholars' works on Bernard. I have a section of my library on Bernard of Clairvaux. So I'm not speaking from ignorance. And everyone knows that, well, maybe you guys don't know that, but we all have heard of Taylor Marshall's prelest vision of the church, the lady of the church's milkers. Well, Marshall wasn't the first to have this vision of milkers. Bernard of Clairvaux has the vision, if I recall, of Mary Milker shooting breast milk into his mouth. Or perhaps a legend. So maybe they will say this is a legend. But it made its way into Roman Catholic artwork where Mary is shooting breast milk into Bernard of Clairvaux's mouth. This is, again, bizarre Roman Catholic ideas of mysticism and spirituality. And I think Bernard is one of the first figures. And one of the things that is present in Bernard is this idea of reinterpreting the Song of Songs, not just as an analysis of the union between Christ and the church. I wouldn't even disagree with that. I know what the Song of Songs is about. I've been reading the Bible since I was a kid. I've read the Song of Songs many times. And so the Song of Songs is a love poem between Solomon and one of his wives. And I don't necessarily disagree with saying, okay, so this is an analogy for the church and Christ, right, the bride. But we don't go hog wild with this and think then that the desire that we have for God is in any way sexual. But the medieval mystics do this very thing, where they go wild and crazy with the analogy, and now the soul is supposed to begin to have these sexual affiliations and fantasies with God or with Christ. I'm not trying to be gross or blasphemous, but this is what you get in these medieval mystics, especially the women. So, for example, now this one is not related to sex, but the famous biography of Catherine of Siena, one of the most famous Roman Catholic saints, is that she claimed to literally have her heart taken out, and then it showed up later and gave her a new heart of vermilion and fire, saying that it was Jesus' heart. So not only did Catherine of Siena claim to have Jesus' literal heart in her, she actually walked around for a time with no heart at all. Now, people say, well, you don't have to believe in the Roman Catholic visions. This is missing the point. I know that in Roman Catholicism, you don't have to believe in every claim of a saint or a private revelation or whatever. The difference is that, well, wait a minute, Deuteronomy 13 and Deuteronomy 18 say that if you claim visions and revelations and they're false, you're a false prophet. How could a false prophet be a saint? Do you see the difference there? So they keep deflecting over into, well, the dogmatic definition says I don't have to believe in saints' private revelations. But Scripture says that private revelations don't get you out of the criteria of being a true prophet or saint, which means that you can't lie and have false visions and delusions. Do we have to go back to Deuteronomy 13 and 18 again? You guys people don't know these texts. Where's the freaking... If there arises a prophet among you or a dreamer of dreams, and they give you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or wonder comes to pass. Now notice, this is even if it comes to pass, right? And it says, let's go serve other gods. You shall not listen to that prophet or dreamer. For God is testing you to know whether you love God, and you'll walk after his commandments and obey his voice. But that prophet or dreamer shall be put to, you know what, because they have spoken in order to turn you away. So you will put away the evil from your midst. So notice, the pattern here is you don't listen to these kinds of quackeries. And then we have similar statements in Deuteronomy 18 about false visions and false prophets and conjurers and mystics and people that prophesy or speak revelations out of their heart and not from God, right? Just like Jeremiah, right? Jeremiah talks about false prophets, false diviners, false revealers, and in both cases, Deuteronomy 13:18 and the text in Jeremiah about not listening to the false prophets who dream a dream from their own hearts and not from God. This means they're fakes. It doesn't mean, well, they're still good, but I mean, imagine applying the Vatican logic to these texts, right? If that was the case, then the text would say, well, these are private revelations, so you don't have to follow them, but they're still saints. And it's the exact opposite of what's said here. Imagine Paul saying the logic of the Roman Catholic position. Right, let's apply the Roman Catholic position to Paul's logic here. I marvel that you turn away so soon from him who called you in the grace of Christ to a different gospel, which is not another, even though there are some who trouble you and want to pervert the gospel. But even if we or an angel from heaven preach another gospel to you other than what you've been preached, they are still saints. Oh, wait, does he say that? No, he doesn't say that. And he says it twice. So Paul's approach is in principle the same as Deuteronomy 13 and 18. The existing prior revelation judges the new. And if the new is found wanting or false, just like with Muhammad, have we not made this same point about the Muslims, right? Then the new is phony baloney. Why do we not listen to Muslims? Because of this, in part. Okay, well then why would I believe that, where's it at? Let's go back to Margaret Mary Alacoque. Mother Grafey, she asked Mother Grafey to allow her to sign with a knife the name of Jesus in her chest. And then the blood flowed. Now notice, it's not an issue of whether you have to accept her, quote, private revelation. It's if she's wrong in doing this, then she's a false prophet. Right? And if she's a false prophet, how could she be a saint? So they're missing the whole point when they say, you don't have to believe it, but she's still a saint. Oh, okay, so Muhammad is still a prophet, but I don't have to believe him. You see the stupidity of that logic? But actually, Roman Catholics want to say they believe they worship the same God as Islam, so maybe it does make sense to them. Whatever. Yeah, you have fun with that. Now, where was this other guy who put up a quote? And somebody said, who is this? I don't know who this other person is. It was just somebody who commented, and I have no reason to think that they're lying, but somebody claimed to be a scholar. He says, I wrote my PhD on late medieval Roman Catholic mystical texts. This is a major reason why I chose Orthodoxy and not Catholicism. When you know the tradition well, you become incredibly disconcerted by what you see in it. Beguine women mystics describe being caressed by Christ, visions of melting into the Trinity, etc. no essence or distinction, so they become one with. Now, that's what we're going to see in these mystics, right? Because they're struggling with union with God, but they're in a church that teaches that the only union that you have in this life is with another created grace or another created reality, not with an actual uncreated reality. He says, even classics of Roman Catholic spirituality like Imitation of Christ, which begins with good things like repentance and humility, goes off in the final chapters describing a mystical union with Christ through erotic terminology. Annihilationism, the loss of the self, etc. None of this is all just, it's the idea of fusion. You become one with the monad, henosis. You become one with God and losing your identity and particularity. After Bernard of Clairvaux, we get the rise of a new kind of mysticism with Francis of Assisi and Bonaventure, stigmata. Francis, at the end of his life, has the vision of an angel, a six-winged seraph, nailed to a cross. Okay, well, angels weren't crucified. Jesus isn't a cherub. No cherub was crucified. So this is a false vision. And it's after this vision that he supposedly achieved the stigmata. Bonaventure as well is full of similar ideas of ecstasy and bizarre notions of union with God. Bonaventure claimed in his mind's journey into God. By the way, it's our whole being that journeys into God in the Orthodox tradition. It's not your mind. That's a neo-platonic idea. But all these people were basically neo-platonists. How does this occur? Well, for Bonaventure, one looks at the natural world as evidence of God's creative activity. Then, one imaginatively considers the same natural things as embodying God's power and wisdom. Third, one turns within oneself and considers the mind with its powers of memory, knowledge, and love as an image of the Trinity. The fourth step of this contemplation is that the mind, after its purification by divine grace, is brought to Christ. Fifth, one meditates on God as being or existence. And then in the sixth step, one considers God as good, which according to Dionysius is the highest and best of God's name. As Bonaventure exclaims, to be good is to overflow with love and gifts. It is because of this love that God wills and that God spills over into the three persons of the Trinity. God doesn't spill over into the three persons of the Trinity. God is God the Father, who then communicates the love through the Son and the Spirit. Rhineland mystics. Meister Eckhart. Meister Eckhart believed in a ecstatic experience of experiencing God, wherein for God to truly be one with the soul, God must put aside Trinity and merge with the soul. So notice now, triad or Trinity is secondary to God as supreme being, the monad, merging or fusing with the soul. So notice again, anti-Trinitarian. Also, in Meister Eckhart, the body is a distraction. It's a thing that keeps us from God. To be fully merged with God means the soul is fully merged with God, and the body is given a negative place. After this, we get the rise of mystics like Jean Gerson and Nicholas of Cusa. In both of these cases, it's similar types of mystical union. Julian of Norwich, Hildegard, all of these people have similar tendencies, which is to flee the world, flee the body, flee finitude, and merge with the one. In the case of Nicholas of Cusa, God is opposite the world, and the world is opposite God. Since God is opposite the world, and the world is opposite God, in reality, God must be in the world and be one with the world. This ultimately leads Cusa to posit that pantheism is the case, and that ultimately the world itself is an extension of God, and the world is infinite. This is the beginning of the positing of an infinite universe theory in Nicholas of Cusa, who was a famous cardinal. And Nicholas of Cusa also, people argue, prepares the way for the multiverse theory, because once you have an infinite universe, the logic of multiverse goes on to say that, well, if the universe is extending infinitely, then at some point you would have another universe like ours, and another planet like ours. And if it's infinite, then there's an infinite number of those. And if there's an infinite number of those, there's an infinite number of variations. So there's a universe where you are Bill Cosby. There's a universe where you are a dragon. I mean, you see how silly this gets. But this is where the, quantum jibber jabber multiverse people go. And why would we do that? Well, that all stems from the original error of saying that the universe must also be infinite. The women mystics, as we said, of this time are notable, both saints and non-saints of this period in the Middle Ages in the Latin West. Hildegard of Bingen. Hildegard wrote many, many works. She was a surprisingly scientific, academic woman. But she also claimed to have these visions of Christ and God. Hildegard claimed to see the Trinity, which I don't think makes any sense. Jesus says no one has seen the Father at any time. Hildegard says that ultimately salvation is a return to virginity. Virginity was the state of Eden, and the fall is linked to sexuality. Virginal bodies, for example, retain the qualities of earthly paradise, while sexual bodies are what is in the fallen world. Hildegard's visionary experiences lead her to articulate the presence of divine forms. For example, the powerful female entity of Sapientia or Caritas. So again, here we have female aspects of God. Sophia, here she's calling it Sapientia. These are Gnostic influences. So again, although this doesn't go into Neoplatonic or Gnostic influences, that's clearly what's going on. Virginity is what is in Eden, and human sexuality is necessarily fallen. But God created human sexuality. So if you were logically consistent with that, then God has tricked us because he's given us a sexual desire which is evil. So notice that they're inconsistent on this position. Other mystics after her, like Gertrude the Great, one of the other most famous medieval mystics, went even further to talk about the sexual relationship that she had with Christ through this idea of Christ's love that would fixate and penetrate her. I'm not joking, this is the terminology that her and others utilize. And this is because these are sort of like crazy women who've never been with a person, and so they begin to have these fantasies that Jesus is not just their boyfriend in a spiritual sense, but these people are crazy. I mean, there's no other way to explain this. The medieval Beguines, Hadewich, who this guy just mentioned, typically take the courtly love tradition of their time that was poetic, then apply this to their sexual relationship with God. For some of these women, because they were not married, they then transferred that to their relationship to God, and then found this to be a path of divinization through a bizarre worship of virginity. So now there's this virginity cult, and remember Paul said that there would come about false teachers in the church saying that marriage is evil and of the devil, and that sexuality is evil and of the devil. That's exactly what the medieval Latin mystical women do, and so do the men. All right, we're going to stop there because I'm going to do part two we're halfway through the book. So part two will be for subscribers to the website. You can over to Jay's Analysis and subscribe there to get the full talk. We got more super chats to go to here, but I want to remind you guys that we do have a show sponsor, and that is chalk.com. I want you to be toxically masculine and not a soy medieval weirdo.
I'm gonna put you on something crazy real quick. Most of these Zoomer gym bros are consuming macro-guzzling synthetic dyes and synthetic sweeteners on the daily. They don't even know it. Goofy AF. There's nothing great about that. Do not listen any further unless you are an alpha or sigma male. This is important and there could be consequences. There's a new certified sigma male pre-workout powder for sigmas only. It is guaranteed to empower you to dominate your co-workers, fire your boss, aggressively gamble, or invade a small village. Chad mode stands out from the crowd by excluding artificial flavors, preservatives, sweeteners, and dyes. We've even avoided so-called natural flavors, which are actually not natural at all, ensuring a clean and effective formula. Experience the pure goodness of Chad mode, colored with organic blue spirulina extract, organic lemon, cherry, and organic maple crystals. Forget synthetic caffeine made in a sketchy Chinese lab. Embrace the natural power of organic green coffee bean extract, which will get your mind going and pump you up to the max. Chad mode is made in America with all clean ingredients, the first clean pre-workout of its kind. Why are these people adding synthetic sweeteners to every single pre-workout when there are many studied downsides to consuming nasty fake sucralose? Each dose of Chad mode contains the kick of a cup and a half of coffee, delivering a surge of energy alongside essential vitamins, minerals, amino acids, and herbal extracts. Chad mode will allow you to fire your boss and dominate anyone who opposes you. Chad mode will make you more dominant in your daily life, so proceed with caution. It's as simple as mixing 1 or 2 scoops of our fine powder into water or juice, providing you with a delicious, energizing beverage featuring a burst of sweet organic fruit flavor. Chad mode will give you the extra edge you desperately crave. Don't miss out. Secure your supply of Chad mode on TikTok Shop with a limited time massive discount. Elevate your workouts and supercharge your days. Chad mode, not for your average gym bro zoomer who consumes synthetic blue dyes on the daily. Buy on the TikTok Shop now with a massive discount provided by TikTok for a very limited time. Buy now while this is still available, or go to chalk.com and use code in caption. Chad mode has been flying off the shelves because it's the first of its kind, certified for alpha males only. Do not buy if you are a beta. We will refund your money. I'm gonna put you on something crazy real quick. Most of these Zoomer gym bros are consuming macro-guzzling synthetic dyes and synthetic sweeteners on the daily. They don't even know it. Goofy AF. There's nothing great about that. Do not listen any further unless you are an alpha or sigma male. This is important and there could be consequences. There's a new certified sigma male pre-workout powder for sigmas only. It is guaranteed to empower you to dominate your co-workers, fire your boss, aggressively gamble, or
show
invade.
off something that we're all proud of. I got a browser here. This is Jay Dyer's much vaunted, much sought after Philosophy 101. Now, he just got this page up. We are just testing it out. You guys are some of the first people in the world to see it. I want to say, for my part, it's not Philosophy 101. I think this is a mistitling. I really think of it as like Philosophy Unleashed, because a Philosophy 101 course, they give you kind of some useless information that you can't make sense of. Jay actually lays out over 12 weeks, dozens and dozens of hours put into just the presentation of this, let alone the hundreds and thousands of hours of research that it takes to have a coherent evolution and history of the origins of philosophy, the uses of philosophy, the different ways to look at it over time, and how that has been brought about to what we have today, which is almost an absence of philosophy on the objective logic and reason side, and an overabundance of woke philosophy that is irrational and is made up day by day as people are like, I think we should bring racism back, and then here's a justification, and then it gets wokeified and spread out, and then all of a sudden you have a bunch of communist, socialist ideas where you become the property in action. You need to be able to stand your own ground. It helps to have a
Let's go. We got a few super chats, and also I would remind everybody too that there is a famous essay from Vladimir Lossky, who studied under Etienne Gilson, the most famous Thomist of the last century. Lossky was his student, and so Lossky understood Thomism and scholastic theology very well from the best. And of course, he wrote a famous paper on the procession of the Spirit here. I'm going to link it for you guys, and I recommend it because it also gives a full presentation of our critique of the idea of relations of opposition. So I think people just forget. They don't realize that when you hear me start arguing stuff, like when I hop on a stream, if I argue about relations of opposition, it's not something I just made up or I'm going to argue out of nowhere that ain't no good. It's because I read all this stuff I've read this stuff for like 15 years in other people that we all know, like Losky. So here is Losky's famous essay critiquing the idea of relations of opposition as a consistent way to differentiate the persons, and critiquing the fact that it's eventually really just marshaled out for filioque. And he gives a great critique of why it doesn't work to do that. So you'll notice that all the criticisms that I had came from places like this. And the people that we're talking about, they haven't even read the critiques that I'm talking about. I mean, at least I've read both of these positions, and I understand what Congar is saying, and I understand what Augustine's arguing for, but I also understand the Orthodox critiques. For the people who want to present their position, or they want to defend the Thomist position, it's really incumbent upon them to read and understand our famous critiques, but they haven't done that. Anyway, so there's the link right there if people want to do that. No, my hair has nothing to do with anything religious. It was because I was hot and I was ready for a change. And I wanted to go back to the more, I wanted to glow up, bro. I wanted to have more of a, svelte sort of look going on. Because I think, that's what we got going on. You know what I'm saying? That's what we got going on, baby. Why not? Why not?
I want to show off something that we're all proud of.
So let's go to, Agonized Candle 184. Would you ever do an analysis of Lars von Trier's Melancholia? I remember watching it and kind of being a little disappointed because the first 10 or 15 minutes, the cinematography I thought was great. And then I felt like the rest of it really just kind of was a letdown. But maybe I could revisit it and see what I think. Storm the Cat, $5. I read that the metaphysics of ancient Nordic paganism has similarity to neo-platonism and Kabbalah. It does. Yeah, so the tree of Yggdrasil, the Sephirotic tree of Kabbalah, I think there's some overlaps. How that came about, where it came from, I don't know. Yggdrasil tree would be connected to the 9 worlds, like the Neoplatonic Kabbalistic cosmology. Yeah, one reason for that could be that a lot of what we nowadays know of as Nordic ancient paganism actually comes via the transmission, the medium of medieval monks and medieval academic translations, and they would actually tweak the text. One of my grad classes, we had a grad class on Beowulf, and we actually went into analyzing what some scholars think is like the actual pre-Christian pagan story of Beowulf, and then some of the Christian accretions from the monastic translations. So my assumption, and I remember watching somebody's video on Nordic paganism, and they made the same point that much of what we know today about ancient Nordic paganism comes from monks Christianizing the texts. So that's actually why you'll find at times, even in Nordic pagan text, Christian ideas like, I think, isn't Odin like nailed to a tree, kind of like Christ is crucified, something like that. But it's entirely possible that some of the medieval monastics who were influenced by some of these Christian ideas, and that there is a whole tradition in the late Renaissance, late medieval period of Christian Kabbalah. This actually becomes very popular in the West. The papacy actually also promotes this during the, around the Borgia times. Renaissance magic becomes very popular, especially in Rome. And that's pretty well known. That's not controversial. But this is the period of like Pico della Mirandola and the Medicis and all that. They're very much into Kabbalah and Renaissance magic. Johann Reuchlin, and there's a bunch of Christian Kabbalists of that time as well in the West. So it wouldn't be surprising that you could potentially have translations of Nordic texts or Nordic traditions that also have that Neoplatonic Christian influence. Eggs McMuffin, $1. Do you have any plans on being in Houston? I would definitely go. No, I don't. Houston's awful, dude. Houston is a garbage town, man. Like, what are you talking about? I have been to Houston many times. I love the people because we've had meetups and we've had things in Houston, but no, I don't have any plans to go to Houston. I mean, when we go to Texas, usually we would be in Austin. You know what I mean? Because if I'm going to be in studio with Lord Voldemort, we're going to be in Austin. I was actually going to be in studio when we were driving back from Vegas last week, but we didn't get to Austin by the time of the 4th hour. So I wasn't in studio, but... anyway, I want to remind you guys also you can subscribe on Rockfin. The part 2 of Jacques Attali is up for the members. So that's over on Rockfin, and it's at the website for the members. What's next? We'll do the part 2 of this very soon, and then we'll probably head back to Whitney Webb's book, because I want to get to the rest of that book. There's some fascinating things in the later chapters there. Remember to head on over to the website. You can get signed copies of my books, Esoteric Hollywood 1 and 2. Looking forward to finishing Esoteric Hollywood 3 in the coming months, so look for that. And